I chose youth and lost everything. My husband. My happiness. A daughter whom I had no right to love openly. The price of beauty turned out to be a curse that I had to stop, even if it meant disappearing from her life forever. I used to think that aging came quietly, that it tiptoed into your life through fine lines, subtle aches, and the slow, inevitable wearing down of youth. But mine came like a storm. It started just after our honeymoon in Sedona. I remember standing in front of the mirror at the hotel, dabbing a bit of lotion under my eyes, noticing the skin felt thinner, drier. Not tired, depleted. James was snoring in the next room, his sunburned shoulders rising and falling with every breath, unaware that something inside me had shifted. Within 2 weeks of coming home, the change accelerated. My skin turned grayish dull. Makeup settled in ways it never had before. I felt hollow. I checked my thyroid, my iron, every hormone panel you can name. All perfect. According to medicine, I was in excellent health. But every morning, the face in the mirror looked more like my mother. Then my grandmother. I'm a dermatologist. I live in science. In logic. But this was beyond logic. Patients began to ask if I was okay. Friends said I looked tired. Strangers offered me their seats. At 32, I was being mistaken for 50. One evening, I found myself searching the back alleys of the internet, not for treatments, but for answers that existed outside of journals and case studies. That's how I found Lenora. She didn't have a website, just a phone number passed around in cryptic comment sections in wellness forums that talked about ancestral residue and generational pacts. Her trailer sat on a forgotten patch of land outside of Tucson, surrounded by broken lawn ornaments and tall grass that whispered when the wind moved through. She was waiting for me on the porch. I hadn't even introduced myself when she said, "It's not your body that's sick. It's your inheritance." Inside her home, everything smelled like burnt lavender and copper. She didn't ask questions. Just took my hands and held them over a cracked bowl of blackened salt. "Someone in your bloodline made a deal," she said. "And you're paying the debt." I laughed. The sound felt wrong in the silence of that place. But the more she spoke, the more pieces started to align. My grandmother who never let anyone take her photo. The stories my father refused to share. The strange, symbolic jewelry passed down and whispered warnings about keeping it safe. Then came the offer. A candle. A silver blade. A ritual. "You can choose beauty," she said. "But it will cost you something greater." I told myself I didn't believe her. But that night I lit the candle anyway. The candle smelled like old roses and ash. I placed it on the windowsill just like she told me. Not the south-facing one, never the south. I didn't know why. I didn't ask. I set the small silver knife next to it, handle pointed toward the open air. The flame flickered high, unnaturally tall, casting wild shadows across the wall. I watched it for hours. At some point, I must have fallen asleep on the floor. When I woke, the candle had burned down to a cold pool of wax, hardened into the grooves of the plate. The knife was tipped slightly off the edge, as if something had touched it. I don't know why, but I felt breathless. Lighter. I stood and walked to the bathroom. The difference was instant. The bags under my eyes were gone. The sallow tone replaced with a blush I hadn't seen in years. My lips fuller, my cheeks lifted, my skin radiant. I touched my face over and over like I'd won the lottery. That day James came home early. He brought flowers, held me tighter than he had in weeks. Something in his voice cracked when he told me I looked glowing. That night he kissed me with urgency. We made love with the kind of hunger I thought we'd lost. For a moment I felt like the woman I used to be. Like my youth hadn't just returned, it had rewritten everything broken between us. I thought the candle had only healed my skin. I didn't know it had already begun to burn through my life. A week later I found out I was pregnant. Felt like a miracle. I had always wanted to be a mother, but the timing had never been right. We weren't trying. In fact, James had said he needed more time. So when the test came back positive, I stared at it for a full hour before the reality hit. I laughed and cried at the same time. Everything was going to be perfect again. We'd start over. The curse, if it was ever real, was broken now. I didn't tell him right away. I wanted it to be special. I bought a tiny onesie and wrapped it in tissue paper. But the night I planned to give it to him, he didn't come home. I waited until midnight. Called. Texted. No reply. He came back the next morning, smelling of whiskey and hotel soap. His eyes avoided mine. He didn't open the gift. He didn't even sit down. He just said it blunt and numb. That he was confused. That he'd met someone else. That it wasn't about me. That he needed time. Space. That he was moving out. My hands never stopped shaking. I didn't say a word. I didn't beg. I didn't tell him about the baby. I just stood there watching the man I loved disappear, carrying a duffel bag and a laptop. I remember the sound of the door clicking shut behind him. It echoed like the snap of a branch inside my chest. In the silence that followed, I turned back toward the gift box on the table. And I laughed. A cracked, hollow sound I didn't recognize. The mirror caught my reflection as I passed. I looked beautiful. Healthier than I had in years. My skin was glowing. My lips red without a drop of color. I looked like a woman on top of the world. And yet inside I was empty. I returned to Lenora's trailer 3 days later. Her door was already open. She didn't ask why I came. She just nodded as if she'd been waiting. Beauty returned, she said. But so did the price. I told her about the pregnancy. Her face shifted. I thought I saw something. Relief? Sadness? Or maybe it was just the candlelight playing tricks again. You still have a choice, she said. Then she told me about the cycle. About the girl. That if I stayed near my daughter, the curse would begin again. That the price my grandmother paid would bleed through generations. That it would skip no one, not unless someone chose to end it. Chose to break the pattern. And how do I break it? I asked. She didn't answer with words. She handed me a box. Inside was a bracelet. Tiny one. Pink. For a newborn. And a letter. You'll know when to leave, she said. I kept the bracelet in my sock drawer. Hidden like shame. There were nights I took it out just to run my fingers across the tiny beads. Imagining her wrist, impossibly small and warm. I'd whisper her name, the one I never told James. The one I kept just for myself. And in those moments the air in the room felt thicker. Like something was listening. Pregnancy softened the blow of heartbreak at first. I had a reason to wake up. To eat. To breathe. James didn't call, didn't check in. He moved in with her, the woman he said he barely knew. I saw them once at the grocery store. She wore heels and a fresh blowout. He was laughing at something she whispered. My legs went numb in the frozen food aisle. I never told him about the baby. I told no one but Lenora. The idea of motherhood had always been wrapped in a fairy tale for me. Lullabies and pink pajamas. Long walks with a stroller under cherry blossoms. But this child was born from magic. A trade. A debt. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I feared the moment I'd look into her eyes and see the price staring back. As the due date approached, strange things started happening. I'd wake to the sound of the front door opening, but it was always locked. The baby monitor buzzed with static, even though it was still in the box. I began having vivid dreams of my grandmother's house, a place I hadn't visited in decades. In them she stood in the hallway, holding a candle that dripped blood instead of wax. She never spoke, just stared. One morning I found the pink bracelet laid neatly on the kitchen table. I hadn't taken it out in weeks. I didn't remember placing it there. But I knew what it meant. The night labor started, it rained hard. The kind of desert rain that feels like it's trying to cleanse something older than dust. I delivered alone, in a sterile room with buzzing fluorescent lights. No husband. No family. Just a tired nurse with soft eyes who kept squeezing my hand like she could feel the storm inside me. When they placed her on my chest, everything stopped. She was beautiful. Dark hair. Long lashes. Her breath came out in tiny huffs. I touched her cheek and felt a heat that wasn't from the delivery room. It was something ancient. Deep. As if all the women in my bloodline were watching through her. I held her for 59 minutes. At minute 60 I kissed her forehead, unwrapped the bracelet from my wrist, and slipped it around hers. Then I walked away. I left the letter with the nurse, along with adoption instructions and a sealed envelope marked for her. When she's ready. The cab waited outside the hospital, engine idling. I remember sitting in the back seat, watching the building shrink through the window until it disappeared behind a row of trees. I didn't cry. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, one hand pressed flat against my stomach where her weight used to be. I moved across the state that same week. Changed my number. Closed my practice. I bought an old house near a lake and filled the rooms with plants that never bloomed. Every morning, I walked to the water and whispered her name again. Years passed. I kept track quietly, carefully. I learned the name of the couple who adopted her. Kind, educated, wealthy. No connections to our bloodline. Clean. They called her Ellie. Every year on her birthday, I sent a card with no return address. No signature. Just a short poem and a pressed wildflower. A ritual only I knew was a ritual. I never saw her. Not until she turned 7. That day I drove past her school. Just once. Just a glimpse. She was in the playground, crouched beside a tree, cupping something small in her palms. A beetle, maybe. A feather. She looked up suddenly right toward my car. My breath caught. She smiled. Waved. I didn't wave back. I turned the corner, parked 2 blocks away, and finally let myself sob. Not for her. Not for James. For everything I had wanted to keep and had to let go to protect her from the life I was given. That night, the candle flickered again on its own. As if someone or something was still watching. Time stopped moving forward and began folding in on itself. Every day in that lakeside house felt the same, a mirror of the one before it. I took early morning walks, fed birds that never landed, brewed tea I rarely drank. I kept my old license in the back of a drawer, along with the only photo I had of her. I told myself I was healing. But it was a lie made of soft rituals and clean kitchen counters. I watched Ellie grow from a distance. Photos appeared online occasionally, tagged by others, a school performance, a summer camp group shot, a community picnic. I kept folders full of them, each one labeled by date, each one studied like scripture. I knew her laugh from a blurry video of her blowing out candles. I memorized the way her head tilted when she was concentrating. I knew she loved drawing. Horses. The color yellow. But she didn't know me. She never would. Until the day the bracelet came back. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address, tucked between flyers in my mailbox. No note. Just the bracelet. Same beads, same stretch, worn and a little faded, like it had lived a life without me. My first thought was that something had gone wrong. I drove to town and used the library computer to check every news site, every social media feed connected to her name. Nothing tragic. Nothing terrifying. Just a photo from 2 days earlier, Ellie holding a prize ribbon beside a pony, grinning into the sun. So why send it? I placed the bracelet on the mantel. It sat like a challenge. Like a question I was too afraid to ask. That night, I dreamed of Lenora again. She stood in a circle of dead flowers, her mouth sewn shut with black thread. When I woke, the house smelled faintly of roses and wax. By morning, the bracelet was gone. I didn't leave. I didn't panic. I just sat in silence for hours, watching the windows, listening for sounds that didn't belong. The next week, I began bleeding. It wasn't heavy. Not at first. Just enough to stain the edge of a towel or turn the water pink in the tub. But it didn't stop. I went to a clinic under a false name. Ran the tests. Waited 2 hours. The nurse called me in with wide, gentle eyes. I didn't hear most of what she said. Just 3 words. Primary ovarian failure. The term didn't make sense. I wasn't old. I wasn't sick. And yet, I knew. Deep in the part of me that still whispered prayers to shadows, I knew the curse wasn't over. It had just shifted. It was still moving through me like a tide, pulling, crashing, erasing. I drove back to Lenora's trailer. It was gone. Only a scorched circle in the dirt remained, surrounded by shards of glass and bones I didn't recognize. I stood there until the sun dipped below the hills. My breath made fog in the air. I spoke out loud, not knowing if anyone or anything was still listening. I broke the chain. I did what you asked. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper I couldn't quite catch. The next morning, James called me. His number blinked on the screen like a ghost from a decade ago. I let it ring until the final vibration. Then he called again. And again. Finally, I answered. His voice was softer, slower. A version of him I'd never known. He said he'd seen a photo of Ellie online. Said she looked just like me. He asked how I was. Where I'd gone. He said he wanted to talk. To meet. He didn't know the truth. He didn't know she was ours. I didn't say much. Just that I was okay. That I hoped he was too. I told him not to look for me again. After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling for hours. Somewhere in that vast, quiet house, the bracelet ticked like a clock, though I could never find where. That week, I saw Ellie again. I hadn't meant to. I was just passing through town for groceries. But there she was at the farmer's market, picking apples with her mother. Laughing. Alive. Bright. She looked up again. Right at me. And she smiled. Not a curious smile. Not polite. A knowing one. I turned and walked away, heart pounding, eyes burning. That night, I didn't sleep. I pulled every old photo of my grandmother from storage looking for a clue. A pattern. A promise I hadn't kept. And that's when I found it. Inside the back cover of an old photo album, taped behind the last page, was a letter. It was from my grandmother. Addressed to me. The envelope was thin. Fragile, like it had barely survived the weight of time. My hands trembled as I peeled it open. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable, tight and slanted, like my grandmother always wrote when she didn't want anyone else to read it. The letter was dated 2 weeks before her death. To my granddaughter. If you're reading this, then the burden has already reached you. I did something once when I was young and stupid and in love with the wrong man. I didn't know it would follow us for generations. She spoke of a healer. A woman who lived deep in the mountains of New Mexico. My grandmother had gone to her in desperation, sick from heartbreak, tired of feeling invisible. The healer had offered her beauty, power, allure. But in return, she was told the gift would skip her and land on the firstborn girl of her bloodline. I said yes anyway. I was selfish. You were only a dream then, and I traded your future to heal my pain. I am sorry in a way you cannot imagine. She wrote about the candle, the knife, the dreams. She described them in exact detail, the same rituals I had followed without ever knowing she had once done the same. But the part that struck hardest wasn't the confession. It was the warning. You cannot fight darkness with more darkness. If you try to undo what I did through the same means, you will only pass it forward. The only true way to end it is through sacrifice. Not of life, but of self. You must give without taking. Love without claiming. Leave without bitterness. Only then will the chain dissolve. I sat with the letter for hours, letting each sentence settle like ash in my chest. In a strange way, it was a relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cursed for no reason. I was the consequence of someone else's pain, but I was also the last link. I had already done most of what she asked. But bitterness still clung to me. I had whispered Ellie's name to the wind. Sent her flowers. Letters. Thoughts. But I had never let go. Not really. I still wanted her to know me. To find me someday. To tell me I made the right choice. But my grandmother's words rang louder now, give without claiming. And for the first time, I understood what that meant. It meant disappearing completely. No trail. No clues. No whispered names in parks. No cards or pressed flowers. Just silence. And the unbreakable belief that she would be okay without me. That night, I packed a bag. Not for the road but for erasure. I didn't leave the same way I had before, rushed, raw, clinging to shadows. This time, I moved deliberately. Quietly. I deleted the cloud folders where I kept every photo of her. Closed the private account I used to track her milestones. Threw away the bracelet, not with ceremony but with calm finality. It landed in the bottom of the trash bin like any other thing no longer needed. I didn't cry. I just folded the letter from my grandmother once more and buried it beneath the floorboards in the attic. Not to hide it, but to leave it behind. It didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to a closed chapter. A circle that was finally breaking. I gave away most of what I owned. Books, furniture, clothing. Only the basics remained. Enough to live simply. Lightly. I sold the house by the lake and left no forwarding address. I didn't even tell the agent my real name. It felt like stepping backward through my own life, undoing each thread that had tied me to the version of myself that wanted to be found. I moved to a coastal town where the air tasted like salt and everything rusted quickly. I rented a tiny studio above a bakery and spent mornings watching seagulls fight over crumbs. No one knew who I was. No one asked. Some nights I still whispered her name, not out of longing, but like a prayer of protection. An invisible thread between us, not pulled, not knotted, just present, still and steady. Months passed. I began volunteering at a women's shelter, teaching self-care to survivors. I didn't talk about my past. I didn't need to. It lived under my skin, guiding my hands gently as I helped others reclaim pieces of themselves. Sometimes I wondered if Ellie would ever feel a missing presence. A quiet echo in her chest that had no face or name. But I knew the answer didn't matter. If I had done it right, if I had truly let go, she wouldn't feel anything but freedom. One evening, a young woman at the shelter handed me a drawing. It was a girl standing in a circle of candlelight, holding a small bracelet in her hand. Her eyes were open, clear, peaceful. She said she dreamed it. I didn't ask questions. I just took the paper and folded it into the pocket of my coat. And for the first time since the ritual, I felt warmth in my chest that wasn't tied to grief. I had vanished from the story, but I had left behind something better than a name. A legacy without chains. It's been years now. I no longer mark time by holidays or birthdays. I measure it by the blooms on the balcony plants, the sound of tourists passing below, the rhythm of tide and sky. My body has changed again, not cursed anymore. Just aging honestly, naturally, and I welcome it. There is something sacred about fading on your own terms. One morning, I found a letter taped to the door of the shelter. No envelope, just a folded page with careful handwriting. You don't know me, but I think I've seen you before. Once at a market. I was a child. You didn't wave back, but I felt you. Sometimes I dream of a woman with my eyes but older. My mom says dreams are echoes from a life before we're born. I don't know what that means. But I hope wherever you are you feel peace. Because I do. I feel free. There was no signature. Just a small pressed flower tucked inside. A wild yellow bloom, the kind that only grows in dry, stubborn soil. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I sat with that letter clutched to my chest, heart slow and steady, and let the sun rise around me like fire through glass. Ellie doesn't know the whole story. She doesn't need to. What she felt, that freedom, meant the curse truly ended with me. It didn't leap again. It didn't infect the next girl. I had been the last gate, and I had held. Not through power. Not through fire or blade. But by walking away. There are people who say love means holding on. But I know the truth. Sometimes the purest form of love is letting yourself be forgotten so someone else can live untouched. And even though I'll never hear her call me mom, even though she'll never know my voice or my face or my laugh, she carries my name in her blood. And that is enough.